May 1944. The Pacific was boiling with blood and steel, and Japan's submarines were supposed to be its silent guardians. But what began with one intercepted message from a Japanese boat carrying nothing more than rice would trigger the deadliest submarine hunt in naval history. The USS England, a small destroyer escort armed with an experimental weapon called the Hedgehog, would go on to shatter records, sinking 6 submarines in less than 2 weeks. It wasn't just a victory. It was a revolution in anti-submarine warfare that changed the balance of the Pacific War forever. And before we reveal everything, please consider subscribing if you love World War II videos. May 13, 1944. Inside a cramped operations room at Pearl Harbor's Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. The war in the Pacific shifted on the scratch of a pencil. Codebreakers bent over intercepted Japanese transmissions, their eyes scanning endless streams of characters. Most messages were routine, but then one stood out. A submarine, I-16, was scheduled to deliver rice to Bougainville. At first glance, it was mundane. Sacks of rice to feed hungry garrisons. Yet in warfare, food was as vital as bullets. Cut off supplies, and entire units could starve. Lieutenant Commander Robert Williamson set down his coffee, instantly aware of the opportunity. He understood what it meant. If this message was true, the Japanese submarine would be surfacing soon, and surfacing meant vulnerability. The information was too precise to ignore. The United States Navy immediately ordered 3 destroyer escorts, USS England, USS George, and USS Rabbi, to intercept. These ships were not mighty carriers or cruisers, but lean predators designed for one job: to hunt submarines and kill them. What the Japanese did not know was that this one intercepted message would trigger a campaign unlike anything seen before. The Americans weren't just hunting one submarine, they were about to launch the most devastating anti-submarine sweep in naval history, one that would cripple Japan's underwater fleet and prove once and for all that technology, intelligence, and precision could outmatch stealth and tradition. The hunt for Fjord 16 was not simply about sinking a single submarine. It was the opening shot in a 12-day operation that would wipe an entire squadron off the map. The USS England cut through the Pacific at 23 knots, her engines churning seawater into a frothing wake. She was small compared to the giants of the fleet, a Buckley-class destroyer escort displacing just 1,400 tons. But what she carried made her extraordinary. Forward of her bridge, a strange device bristled, a British-designed anti-submarine mortar nicknamed the Hedgehog. Unlike traditional depth charges, which exploded at preset depths and often forced guesswork, the Hedgehog fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in a deadly spread. They didn't detonate unless they struck a solid object. That meant no wasted explosions, no sonar blackout, no time lost. For the first time, submarine hunting wasn't guesswork. It was mathematics. Target depth, bearing, and speed could be calculated in real time, and attacks could be repeated until a hit was confirmed. Executive Officer John Williamson embodied this new approach. A Cambridge-educated officer with a mind sharpened by trigonometry and physics, he knew submarine hunting wasn't just about instinct. It was geometry played out across miles of ocean. He memorized the statistics. Depth charges succeeded in 1 out of 80 attacks. The Hedgehog could kill in 1 out of 5. For Williamson, those numbers weren't abstract. They were a blueprint for changing naval warfare forever. As the USS England steamed toward her first target, her crew sharpened their skills. Sonar operators trained to distinguish whale song from the metallic ping of a submarine hull. Gunners stood ready over racks of depth charges, while others learned the rhythm of the Hedgehog's fire. They knew the risks, Japanese submarines carried torpedoes capable of ripping their ship in half, but they also knew they carried the deadliest anti-submarine weapon yet invented. The stage was set. Somewhere ahead, I-16 prepared to run her supply mission. For the Americans, it wasn't just about intercepting cargo. It was about sending a message to Japan's undersea fleet. The ocean was no longer their sanctuary. On May 19th, the calm Pacific waters betrayed no hint of the violence about to erupt. Aboard USS England, the sonar room was tense. Operators hunched over their instruments in absolute silence. At 13:35, sonarman David Chun froze. Through his headphones came the unmistakable metallic echo of a submarine hull. The range, 2,000 yards. Bearing, 90 degrees. Positive contact, he reported. The hunt had begun. Deep beneath the waves, Lieutenant Commander Teiyuchi Yoshitaka of the THAR-16 had already heard the Americans' sonar pings. He knew the sound, like the heartbeat of death closing in. "Dive! Emergency, dive!" he barked, and compressed air hissed as ballast tanks flooded. The submarine angled sharply downward, sliding toward the cold depths. Yoshitaka had survived 9 war patrols. He knew the tricks. Ride thermal layers that scattered sonar. Shift course suddenly. Run silent to confuse the pursuers. For a time, it worked. At 13:41, England loosed her first Hedgehog salvo. 24 projectiles arced into the sea and sank without a sound. A miss. The second salvo followed at 13:58. This time, one explosion echoed faintly through the water. A hit, but not fatal. The I-16 shuddered, damaged, but Yoshitaka pushed her deeper. The submarine dove below 300 feet, straining its hull, while its crew scrambled to patch leaks. But Williamson was relentless. At 14:33, after nearly an hour of deadly cat and mouse, he fired again. This time, the Hedgehog pattern bracketed the submarine perfectly. 4, maybe 6 projectiles struck home. The explosions ripped through the hull. In I-16's forward torpedo room, seawater erupted in torrents. Lights failed. The bow pitched downward toward the abyss. On the England's bridge, men felt the shockwave rumble through their feet. Moments later, oil and debris floated to the surface. Planks of wood, life preservers, the last traces of 94 Japanese sailors. The Pacific swallowed the rest. For the England's crew, it was more than a kill. It was proof that the Hedgehog worked exactly as promised. First blood had been drawn, and the men understood they were no longer just escorts. They were predators. News of R-16's destruction barely reached Pearl Harbor before another opportunity arose. On May 20th, cryptographers intercepted a second Japanese transmission. It revealed the existence of the 7th Submarine Squadron. 7 boats stretched in a patrol line from Truk to the Admiralty Islands. Their mission was to detect American fleet movements toward the Marianas and Palau. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyota believed this line would shield Japan's vulnerable supply routes. Instead, it had just exposed them. Commander Hamilton Haynes of Escort Division 39 now had orders. Sweep west to east, destroy everything in their path. On May 22nd, at 3:50, radar aboard USS George lit up with a surface contact. RO-106 was running on the surface, recharging batteries. A fatal necessity. The submarine crash-dived within 40 seconds, but its position was already known. The hunt was on. At 4:15, George fired a Hedgehog salvo, but missed. The submarine twisted beneath the sea. Hydrophone operators timing sonar pings to predict when attacks would come. But at 4:25, England re-entered the game. Williamson had been watching, learning the evasion patterns. He recalculated speed, course, and dive angle with chilling accuracy. At 5:01, the England's Hedgehogs splashed into the water. Seconds later, 3, maybe more, detonations thundered beneath the waves. A massive plume of water erupted as RO-106's hull ruptured violently. 59 men went down with her. 2 submarines in 4 days. The Japanese patrol line, designed to be an impenetrable barrier, was already unraveling. For Admiral Toyota, this wasn't just a setback, it was a nightmare. If the Americans could continue at this pace, the 7th Submarine Squadron would cease to exist. For the crew of the England, however, it felt like destiny. They weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were dismantling Japan's undersea fleet 1 submarine at a time. The dominoes had begun to fall, and the England was just getting started. By May 23rd, the 7th Submarine Squadron was unraveling, though few in Tokyo yet realized it. That morning, radar screens aboard USS WWII picked up another surface contact. A lone submarine running at speed, just 250 miles northwest of New Ireland. It was RO-104. Like the others, she had surfaced to charge batteries. Her commander gambling that speed under cover of night would keep him safe. Instead, it marked him for death. The submarine dove within 45 seconds of detection, but that was long enough. American fire control had the exact dive point. At 6:17, WWII fired the first Hedgehog salvo. Miss, the Japanese crew executed sharp course changes and depth shifts using every tactic in their playbook. Compressed air bursts to mimic false sonar returns, rapid dives and ascents to create confusion, even sound impulse jamming in desperate attempts to mask their hull's echo. For nearly 2 hours, the battle raged beneath the waves. RO-104 was skillful, perhaps the most cunning adversary yet. At 7:17, USS George joined the attack, raining down Hedgehogs in rapid succession. Still nothing. The Japanese commander was burning precious battery power, but he was also forcing the Americans to waste ammunition and time. Then, at 8:19, Executive Officer Williamson stepped forward. He had studied every evasive maneuver the Japanese had used over the past week. He knew RO-104 could not keep darting around at full throttle forever. The batteries would give out. Williamson plotted not where the submarine was, but where it had to be once it slowed to conserve power. His calculation was cold, precise, mathematical. At 8:34, England fired. 24 Hedgehog projectiles arced into the sea and vanished beneath the surface. Seconds later, the ocean convulsed. 10, maybe a dozen, direct hits shattered RO-104's hull. The submarine disintegrated under the pressure. 3 minutes later, a secondary explosion echoed as compressed air tanks ruptured. Debris and oil slicks spread across the water like a funeral shroud. 58 Japanese sailors were gone. In less than a week, the England and her consorts had eliminated 3 submarines. Statistically, such a streak bordered on the impossible. Depth charges in 1942 had averaged 1 kill for every 80 attacks. Hedgehogs now made success seem routine. But the Americans knew this wasn't luck. It was technology, tactics, and discipline converging into something devastating. For the Japanese, the Pacific had just become far deadlier than they ever imagined. The very next night, May 24th, the sea once again betrayed its secrets. At 1:20, radar aboard USS George picked up another submarine, RO-116, running on the surface at 12 knots. Its commander had chosen speed over stealth, hoping to outrun danger. But by 1:50, sonar locked on as the submarine dove in panic. The England moved into position. By now, Williamson's methods were honed to perfection. He knew how long it took a Japanese submarine to crash dive, how deep it would settle, how fast it could turn. At 2:14, England's Hedgehogs splashed down. Seconds later, 3 to 5 of them exploded in unison, slamming into RO-116's pressure hull. Unlike earlier battles, there was no massive eruption, just a sickening sequence of groans and metallic tearing, audible even through sonar headsets. The Japanese crew fought desperately to contain the flooding. Bulkheads creaked, pumps screamed, ballast tanks vented in a futile attempt to regain control. But seawater was merciless, and the Pacific pressed harder with every passing second. For 20 agonizing minutes, sonar operators aboard England listened to the submarine die. They heard compartments collapsing one after another, the deep metallic cries of a vessel being crushed by the sea. Then, silence. 56 men were gone. By dawn, 4 submarines had been destroyed in just 6 days. The American crews were exhausted but electrified. The England's kill record was already attracting attention across the fleet. Reports streamed into Pearl Harbor, where Admiral Nimitz himself demanded full details. Admiral King in Washington issued a statement: "There will always be an England in the United States Navy." For the Japanese, the shock was profound. Radio intercepts revealed panic spreading through the 7th Squadron. Commanders whispered about superweapons and impossible accuracy. Morale plummeted. Submariners began questioning whether surfacing was suicide, whether evasive tactics still worked, whether survival was even possible. The once proud hunters of the Imperial Navy had become prey. 4 submarines gone, 3 still left in the line. The Americans weren't finished. They were only gaining momentum. By May 26th, the hunter-killer group had been at sea for over a week. Ammunition stocks were running low, and the crews of the England, George, and Raby were running on caffeine and adrenaline. Standard naval procedure dictated they should head to port for resupply. Yet Commander Hamilton Haines wasn't ready to leave. Intelligence intercepts hinted that RO-108 was nearby, perhaps trying to regroup with the last 2 surviving boats. Haines gave the order: one more sweep before withdrawal. That night, radar screens aboard the England pulsed with life. At 23:04, sonar locked onto a shallow-running contact, just 1,200 yards off the starboard bow. It was RO-108, unaware that death was closing in fast. Williamson had only minutes to work out the attack geometry. Based on the sound returns, he pegged the submarine at 120 feet, shallow enough to maximize speed while conserving battery power. At 23:23, England fired her Hedgehog. 24 spiked projectiles splashed into the sea and began their deadly descent. Seconds ticked by in eerie silence. Then came the detonation. Multiple hits tore open RO-108's hull, and the sea boiled as a massive explosion erupted from below. Witnesses described a phosphorescent glow, the eerie light of shattered batteries flickering beneath the surface before vanishing into blackness. In less than 20 minutes, the fight was over. 54 Japanese sailors were gone, their boat destroyed so quickly that there had been no time for elaborate evasion. For the Americans, it was almost anticlimactic. A kill so swift and clinical, it stunned even the seasoned crews. 5 submarines had now been destroyed in 8 days. Never in naval history had one small group of escorts achieved such devastation. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyota received the reports with growing dread. His 7th Squadron was collapsing before his eyes, the submarines he had entrusted to watch the Pacific choke points erased in rapid succession. In his mind, the situation had shifted from one of tactical setbacks to outright catastrophe. But the greatest test was still to come. RO-105, commanded by a veteran officer and carrying a division commander as passenger, was waiting. Unlike the others, she would not go quietly. May 29, 1944. The 7th Squadron's last hope surfaced under a dark Pacific sky. RO-105, commanded by Lieutenant Junichi Inouye, carried not just his crew of 55 men, but also Captain Ryunosuke Sato, one of the Imperial Navy's most experienced submarine officers. Their mission was no longer patrol. It was survival. At 21:30, USS George picked up RO-105 on radar. The submarine crash-dived almost immediately, but her position was now known. What followed would be unlike any other encounter. A 25-hour duel beneath the sea, testing every trick of submarine warfare against every ounce of American persistence. All through the night, George and Rabi hammered the depths with Hedgehogs. Again and again, the ocean shook, but the submarine kept evading. Inouye's maneuvers were textbook brilliance. Emergency turns every 3 minutes, rapid shifts from 60 to 300 feet, compressed air bursts to create false sonar targets, and silent running to mask propeller noise. For every American salvo, there was a Japanese counter. The hours stretched on. Ammunition dwindled. Fatigue gnawed at every man. By dawn on May 30th, George and Rabi were nearly spent. For over 24 hours, they had fought the elusive RO-105 without landing a fatal blow. Captain Haynes, who had held the England in reserve, finally relented. At 7:36, he gave the order. "Oh hell, go ahead, England." Williamson had been watching, calculating. He knew RO-105's evasive rhythms by now, the patterns hidden within the chaos. At 7:36, England's Hedgehogs launched. Moments later, 6 to 10 of them detonated against the submarine's hull. At 7:41, a massive explosion ripped through the depths as compressed air systems and batteries ruptured. Oil, wreckage, and fragments rose to the surface. The last submarine of the 7th Squadron was gone. The duel was over. For the Americans, the hunt had ended in triumph. For the Japanese, it was annihilation. 6 submarines in 12 days, a feat unmatched in naval history. The USS England had etched her name into legend, not through luck, but through precision, innovation, and relentless determination. When the Pacific swells calmed on May 30th, 1944, the ocean floor held 6 shattered Japanese submarines, their crews entombed in silence. In less than 2 weeks, the USS England had ended an entire squadron, a feat no other ship in history would ever match. The numbers were staggering. 400 enemy sailors lost, 0 American casualties. But the legacy went far beyond statistics. Japan's submarine arm, already fragile, never recovered. Without reconnaissance patrols, the Imperial Navy's vision of a decisive counteroffensive collapsed. For America, the hunt proved that technology, training, and intelligence could rewrite the rules of naval combat. The Hedgehog became the standard, and Williamson's precision methods were studied for decades. Admiral King kept his promise. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. But for the men who lived it, those 12 days were more than history. They were a reminder of how innovation and grit can decide the fate of wars.